The number of national leaders who visit Iran to seek help and advice are proof that the Shah is one of the world's few really important people. Even the Shah's most abusive critics, foreign journalists, admit that. The Shah is one of a handful of men who are actually deciding the fate of the world. As President Sadat of Egypt, his guest on this occasion, knows, the Shah has played as big a role as anyone behind the scenes in helping to prevent the start of a fourth Middle East war, which could involve America and Russia. In the front ranks of those encouraging and financing subversion in Iran are extremist Palestinian groups and their paymasters, the Libyans. One price the Shah is paying for using his influence to help defuse the Middle East situation. Oil is the present source of the Shah's power and influence on the world stage. In an extravagant and wasteful age that should have ended in 1973, it was the foreign consumers and their scientists who used oil to change the world. Today, oil is changing the world again. Only this time, it's the owners of the stuff who are calling most of the shots. When King Khalid of Saudi Arabia came to call, there was a good deal of satisfaction in Iran. After the oil price rise explosion, which altered the balance of world economic and political power, the industrialized nations tried to break the unity of OPEC, the oil producers. While the efforts to wreck OPEC were going on, relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia were strained. The industrialized nations were trying to persuade Saudi Arabia to break with the oil policies advocated by the Shah. The Shah was, and still is, OPEC's chief thinker. The Shah's main aim was to persuade King Khalid to hold firm with other OPEC leaders and insist, when necessary, on further oil price rises to offset the ever-rising costs of the goods which the oil producers buy from the industrial nations. Strange as it may seem in today's changing world, the tradition of respect for the monarchy in Iran is such that many Iranians still find it difficult to believe that the Shah and his queen are human beings with the same basic needs and desires as other mortals. The pressures under which this man and his wife and their children live greatly restrict their freedom to behave as a normal family on all but the most private and intimate occasions. In so many ways, the Shah is the exact opposite of the image of him that's projected by others, mostly journalists, outside the country and within. His manner is gentle and not too deceptively so. He's an attentive and patient listener in debate and conversation, and most surprisingly of all, he's a shy man.
What are the sort of things that make you angry?
Angry is injustice, first of all. From wherever it comes. Because especially I get angry if something is done to somebody who cannot defend himself.
Do you lose your temper very much?
No, I don't think so.
But you can if necessary.
Eventually, but I don't think that I would act in those circumstances. I would wait until I cooled off.
The Shah has a good sense of humor, but whether it would stretch to allow his anger to be cooled off in this manner is unknown. How much time are you able to spend with your children as a mother?
Well, I can't say exactly how much time, because sometimes it's 1 hour or more. It depends on my schedule and my work. Or sometimes, unfortunately, it happens that it's only a few minutes for them to come and say hello and go. But as I tell you, it's different. Some days I spend much more time with them. But the average, unfortunately, it's not much during the working days. The problem with the children is that you cannot just have a few hours a day like a tennis game, say that between 5 and 6 I'm going to see them. Because children need you sometimes, and that the hours that you're not free, and when you're free, maybe in those hours they don't need you, they don't have anything to ask you or to tell you. I've been always trying to find a good balance between my two lives, but it becomes more and more difficult because there is so much to do in our own country, and I think fortunately my children also understand in a way that I have responsibilities, and if I'm working it's also for their own future, trying to make things better for them in the future.
But are you like an ordinary mum or even an ordinary dad? Sometimes you get so tied up in your work and perhaps so frustrated that maybe you come home and you take out your frustrations on the children. Do you find that happening?
Unfortunately, it happens sometimes, and I really feel terrible afterwards, because after a day's work and problems or anger, and then you come and the children come completely fresh out of school, they come and shout around, and you're so nervous and so busy that you just can't stand the noise, or if they have a discussion with you, you don't have the patience and so on. And I have had that, and I really feel very bad afterwards, and I try to tell them afterwards, well, I have been angry because I have had a lot to do. Then I tell to myself, then, well, try to work less, or try to control yourself. It's not other people's fault that you have had a long day or a difficult day than not to have, because I think it's in my duty also to be always in a position to have time and patience and smile for everybody. But after all, I'm a human being, and sometimes it's impossible.
What are the ordinary, simple things of life that you miss and cannot do because you are the Queen?
what I would like to go is really downtown in the streets. It is important to have that contact and that feeling, because still I have the majority of my age. I have lived outside the palace. I got married at the age of 20, and I've been married for 16 years. But the experience I had in those days now, they're becoming weaker maybe. Of course I have the contact with the people when I go visit someplace, or especially in the provinces, in the villages. But it's the city of Tehran, the simple thing that I don't know what's happening, I mean, to the simple things of life.
My impression is that you don't really enjoy the ceremony and the high pomp of the court life. Is my impression a correct one?
I think it is. First of all, I must say that we do not have, after all, too much protocol or pomp in a court. There is a protocol in every country, even if it's another kind of regime or system. You know, the problem is that sometimes I feel whether I'm right or wrong not liking this, because maybe still it's part of our traditions, and maybe people expect it to be a little bit different. But I think that there is always a limit or a good balance for all these things. Because
but you're certainly happiest, I think, when you're moving and working outside the formal court circle.
I feel happier because it's more natural, it's more real. The life I live in the pomp, as you say, or those ceremonial occasion, it's not me. I feel that I'm performing.
Because of her personal contact and dialogue with the peasants, Queen Farah saw more quickly than most where the weaknesses in the early development programs were. The Queen was amongst the first to realize that some of the basic needs of the poor were not being provided for in central government plans because the centre didn't always know or understand what the real needs were. So the Queen set out to become the voice of the people. She is now aided by the recently established Institute of Peasant Studies, a hotline of information to the Shah which is not routed through the bureaucracy. The Queen spends at least 3 months of each year travelling the country, often going where some wish she wouldn't. It's no secret in Iran, or not much of one anyway, that Queen Farah has annoyed those who, to protect their own interests, try sometimes to prevent the whole truth from being known, which she insists on reporting.
I cannot stand injustice. If I see someone important or someone richer pushing around someone weaker or someone poorer, this is something that makes me really very depressed, and I can't stand that. Or any sort of injustice is for me very difficult.
There are some in Iran who believe that without Queen Farah, the Shah, because of his preoccupation with global as well as national affairs, would have been in danger in recent years of losing touch with the frustrations of the common people. The frustration for the Shah, the decision maker, is that as development plans go into effect, the middle 50 or 60% of the population begins to move up the ladder to prosperity, but the bottom 30 or 40% stay at the bottom. This happens because those who've moved up the ladder can afford to buy more, and the extra demand they create, especially for food, pushes up the prices for everyone. Not surprisingly, it's the poorest who get hurt most.
With my traveling around the country, I have learned more, and I'm trying to see the problems and find fundamental solution instead of just emergency cures. Taking care of different social organization and different group of socially handicapped people is all right, but it's always giving to them. But it's to arrange the country in a way that people could help themselves to raise their standard of living. After the government has the duty of giving them, it's their right to be of the people to get things from the government.
To give them the basics.
To give them the basics and then teach them to learn how to participate and how to be involved themselves and how to work for themselves, because then there is the danger of the welfare society. We will have in the future a group of people just sitting and relaxing and waiting for someone else or the government to come and help them and only give. And I think humanly, politically and socially it's much more important that people give also something of themselves. And I believe that we should teach our children to be in a way that they should work for what they are going to get. They should deserve it, not to give it for granted, for nothing. And I think at the level of a province, people with the town councils or village councils, they know their problems better, and sometimes they can solve their problems in an easier way and in an inexpensive way than if it's thought and given order from the center or at the top.
The High Economic Council, which meets once a week, is the most important advisory body to the Shah. It consists of the Prime Minister, the Shah's most trusted ally, senior cabinet members, and other key people such as the Governor of the Central Bank. The outstanding merit of the present system in Iran is that at the top, decisions do actually get made. The approach taken by many other governments, shelving the difficult decisions in the hope they won't have to be made, would be disastrous for this country. The difficulty is getting decisions taken at the top translated into action because of bureaucratic interference and the muddle and chaos it causes. Some foreign critics blame the Shah for the muddles because they say he's driving the country too fast. But he never acts before he's considered information from many sources. The trouble is that some exaggerate what can and can't be done to protect themselves. The port of Khorramshahr is now tidy and relatively well organized. When Iran was frantically importing materials and supplies from all over the world in the balmy days that followed the oil price rise explosion, the port was almost paralyzed by chaos. Iran's development program was seriously threatened by delays as ships laden with cargoes waited for months to unload. The mess wasn't cleared up till the Shah took a look for himself and fired those responsible. The Shah's intervention to sort out the mess led to some interesting discoveries. A new port director proved that Khorramshahr could shift nearly double the amount of cargo it had previously moved, provided the bureaucrats didn't interfere. They did, and muddle returned. There can't be many other countries which are so utterly dependent on the leader and now his wife too. Though the Shah is gratified by the affection the vast majority of his people display towards him, nobody is more aware than he of the limitations of the present political system. Nobody is more worried by the likely consequences of a failure to develop a new political system to offer the best prospect for stability when he is gone. But if what the Shah is really searching for is democracy, why has he scrapped the multi-party system and replaced it with one national party?
I thought that, well, it was obvious that one party should be in power, another party criticizing the party in power in order to make all the truth come out and have discussions. And finally, the people, the country, will choose among the best arguments. But the thing is that the establishment of the two-party system was coinciding with our revolution, with things getting done in this country. And obviously, the people in power, representing the majority party, would always win. The other party had never a chance to even get a few votes, because people, seeing that the country was going so quickly in the right way, anyway, in most cases, they would invariably vote for the government party. And lots of talent belonging to the minority party was lost in this way. So I came to the conclusion that during these constructive period, everybody must participate. And fortunately, our people believe in the fundamentals of the 17 points of our revolution. The rest, I am ready to change if necessary, if people come out with better ideas.
In the Shah's view, the key to the future is participation by the people. Without it, he believes that democracy is a sham and meaningless. In Iran today, and under the umbrella of one party, the National Resurgence Party, people are beginning to participate for the first time ever in the country's history. But the people have painful memories of how previous parties were manipulated by corrupt politicians for their own ends.
As past experience has shown, when parties are formed, all its centres immediately become crowded with members. But they end up with just a couple of members, who sit down and write the minutes and even invent imaginary attendances. So how does the party propose to control this in the future so that proper attendance is ensured? I don't mean in groups with experienced members, but the groups in the rural areas.
Aside from questions about the organization of the new party, subjects like housing and slum clearance dominate debates at branch meetings of the party. Real needs are represented.
My only problem is to get a roof over my head. If I had that, Iran would be the best country in the world. May God preserve His Majesty the Shah. Things are much better, but a tenant's life is wretched.
In fact, the growth in the supply of new urban housing units is almost keeping pace with the growth of urban population. But industrial workers with money to spend want faster action to deal with their housing problems.
In my view, if workers who own small plots within the restricted areas are given permission to build their own houses, this problem would be solved. Today, in the party, more promises such as the authorities used to give in the past are not acceptable. We expect our difficulties to be dealt with more quickly and efficiently. If these suggestions are adopted, much of the housing problem will be solved.
It's too soon to judge what real impact the new party is making in the rural areas of Iran, but the first signs are encouraging. To begin with, land reform and the spread of education have helped to awaken the political consciousness of village folk. And in other important ways too, villagers have been made aware of their rights. One of the early points in the Shah's revolutionary charter gave the order for creating in villages throughout Iran what's called a House of Equity. The House of Equity, which has a counterpart in urban areas, is a sort of village or people's court. Every 3 years, the villagers elect 5 of their number to serve as judges in the House of Equity. Only the court secretary, usually a teacher, is required to be able to read and write. The jurisdiction of the court is limited to such things as disputes about land and property, crop damage and family squabbles. It's participation in action.
بفرمایید.
In the Shah's vision of the future, the new party is a means to an end. It's to be the mechanism through which a new political leadership will emerge from the bottom up. That at least is the philosophy and the theory of it all. The composition of the party's executive committees, which report directly to the Shah, is at present unrepresentative. They include too many cabinet ministers and politicians of former parties. But this is a temporary or stopgap measure. The mechanism to provide for the rank and file of party membership to elect all committee members has been set in motion.
البته این 17 ماده انقلاب تا به حال کسی با من در تدوین این 17
Up to the present, no one has shared with me the formulation of the 17 points of the revolution.
و هر چی آمده از فرماندهی به پایین صادر شد.
Whatever has been done downwards by issuing orders.
برای تأمین مطمئن آینده مملکت سازمان‌های ما باید داشته باشند.
But I am not immortal.
که ثمره انقلاب ایران
So in order to secure the country's future, we must have organizations that not only preserve the fruits of the revolution and the achievements so far made, but also make it widen its scope and put down deeper roots.
The Shah, by agreeing to be the head of Iran's one national party, has taken an enormous gamble. He has staked his own immense prestige on making the party work. What the party is currently most in need of is the active support of greater numbers of Iran's politically conscious young people. Many are holding back their support because they remain suspicious, with good reason, of the influence still exerted around the Shah by the old establishment. The young are not yet convinced the Shah can smash what's left of the old establishment. The doubts and suspicions of many of Iran's uncommitted young people are reinforced by the fact that many questions about controversial but fundamental domestic issues don't often find their way into print in Iran's newspapers. The inadequacy of the media is not easy to explain, because on public platforms, and often in the presence of the Shah or Queen Farah or both, the most controversial issues are raised and debated, and yet the media seems reluctant to promote the debate about priorities. The reason seems to be that some of those with influence on the media belong to or support the old establishment, those who in their hearts are fearful of change because they feel their own positions would be threatened by it.
Some of the younger and more progressive Iranians who support your ideals have a very clear and specific vision of the Iran they want to see of the future. They see an Iran in which there is a multi-party system, with the decisions being made by an elected cabinet, and with the king, your son certainly, they say, and perhaps you yourself too, playing a constitutional role rather similar to that of the monarchy in Britain. Is this a vision of the future that you could share?
Well, if this is what our people want, and if they are ready for it, who cares? Why not? But you said those more progressive. I don't know if I would call that progressive. The only thing I can accept for my country are the results. With what kind of system are we going to get the best results in this country? And this is the only thing that is important to me.
But if they were to turn to you in 5-10 years and say, Your Majesty, we now feel up to the job of making the decisions, we'd like you to stand aside.
Yes.
What then?
Well, I will say, okay, if it is within the framework of our revolution, the 17 points, or whatever it is, go ahead. But can, in 20 years' time, we shall be about 65 million people. 65 million people cannot take a decision. You have got to have a hierarchy. In this country, it has been the monarch It has worked for 2,500 years. We are not going to change what would be eventually best for our country just to please some of your people.
No, I'm not talking about pleasing us. I'm talking about if Iranians wanted to make that system work, have a cabinet democracy.
If they all want it, you can't rule a country against the wishes of the people. This is for sure. Not for a long time anyway. If this is what they want, they will get it.
If Western-style democracy is what the people of Iran want, and if that is what they get, Crown Prince Reza, when he takes over from his father, could have less influence on the decision-making process than any Shah before him. If that happens, Iran will be stepping into the unknown, for the nation has prospered and progressed only when there's been an enlightened king on the throne to make the decisions.
Insofar as the search for an effective democracy is concerned, what are the mistakes of the Western models that you specifically want Iran to avoid?
That the party system represents, as I said, not the interests of the nation, the interests of a certain class. This I don't want. In this country, we have almost a constant coalition of all the people gathered in one national endeavor to keep and to make the country progress. I'm not going to lose that. And I'm not going to let what we can see in other countries happening here.
The Shah believes that democracy without discipline is a recipe for anarchy. What he sees happening in some of the liberal democracies of the West is a drift towards anarchy. And that's what he's trying to prevent in Iran. These are some of the weapons taken over the years from Iranian terrorists. This museum is in a room at Evin prison, where some of the hardcore members of various Iranian terrorist groups who've been captured are locked up. The child's doll was used to carry explosives from one terrorist base or safe house to another. The Shah has all along maintained that sabotage and terrorism in Iran is financed and directed from outside the country. One main reason for believing he is right is that under his leadership, the progress Iran has made leaves no real political basis for the kind of internal discontent which would be required to motivate and then support homegrown terrorism. But also for consideration is the evidence of those who've served the cause of terrorism and are now in prison. Sadek Sibakalem Mofrad was a student at Bradford University in England.
Who was actually making the decisions about tactics and opposition to the regime, whether it was killing, whether it was sabotage or whatever? Who was basically dictating the pattern of tactics?
Well, we were primarily against the regime. But to answer your question as to who guided us for our tactic, it was, as far as I know, it was after a sitting that we had in Germany, and there were some Arab extremists who later on we found that they had links with Habash and some other Palestinian extremist group. In fact, it was after this sitting with these people that we decided, after a lot of conversation with them, that the tactic from now on should be a sabotage, assassination, in simple word, urban guerrilla warfare.
But whenever these decisions were taken at various meetings, the point that I'm trying to get at is that it was non-Iranians, basically, who were taking these decisions?
Well, because non-Iranian were much more involved and much more politically minded than we were, naturally, whatever they told, we accepted it, because we looked upon them as people who know better than we do. So whatever they said in the respect of the tactics of the movement, we accepted it as a good experience.
And who was, as far as you know, and you were involved with carrying money from Britain to Iran, who was providing the finance for the guerrilla terrorist activities inside Iran?
Well, first we thought that it was money that the Iranian people had collected, our friends, Arab students, Palestinian students, Greek students, etc. had collected. But later on, when I got back to London and I got to know more of these people, I found out that the money came either from the Habashis movement or from Libya.
Mofrad was arrested while delivering funds from the sources he named to an Iranian terrorist group. He got 3 years. In England, he was a principal officer of an Iranian students' organization which now claims he was tortured and murdered in Iran. Manoucha Salimi is an artist who's given the use of a large empty cell to continue his painting. In 1965, he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for his minor involvement in a plot on the Shah's life. After serving 30 months, he was pardoned by the Shah and released. In 1973, he was arrested for taking part in another plot, this time an attempt to assassinate several members of the royal family. Salimi told me the group of which he was a member was made up almost entirely of Iranian students returning from abroad. I asked him what they told him was their reason for wanting to kill the Shah.
Because the Shah was a symbol of the country, particularly as we had a long history behind us, and the king has always been the symbol of the people in the country. For that reason, and in order to create the maximum irreparable shock. That is why this was their aim, the aim of those who wanted this result. I knew nothing about it.
Now, if the plots had succeeded, particularly the last one, and the king and the queen and the crown prince had been killed, who was going to take over?
I think the answer is very simple. The group, which still exists, some of them in prison, and in general all anarchist activities, are a kind of epidemic. They normally think about how things are to begin, not about how they are to end. They never think so far ahead. For example, if the head of a system is removed, who is to take over? There's no real answer to this question, because even I, when I thought about this, asked myself, what is this for? What will happen next? In fact, none of those people, even Golisorki, the revolutionary leader who spoke so fanatically in court, as you know, he was a completely dedicated communist. Even he did not know what was to happen after the first step.
This is Evin Prison. After what I had read about the alleged police state, it wasn't quite what I had expected. Security at the prison is provided by the military, but as far as the political prisoners within are concerned, it is SAVAK, the secret police, who are in control. SAVAK is an offshoot of the Imperial Armed Forces, but it's not itself a police force. It's what every country has, a national security and intelligence organization. It's as such that SAVAK is responsible for watching those suspected of subversive activities and arresting those who are now political prisoners. For SAVAK's alleged treatment of political prisoners, and in particular the alleged use of grisly forms of torture during interrogations, Iran is described in the international press as being ruled by one of the most brutal and repressive regimes in the world. During my investigations on the spot, I found very little evidence to support the allegations and much to contradict them. Take, for example, the case of Vida Hajabi Tabrizi. By Iranian student groups abroad and their supporters, she is one of the most celebrated of all Iranian political prisoners. She's said to be either dead or, alternatively, so paralyzed by torture that she can't even move. And she is widely reported as being in one or the other of those two conditions. We filmed her unobserved to start with because we were informed that she might act paralyzed if she saw us first.
Ali, would you ask Vida Hajabi if we can talk with her?
I understand what people say.
You know about all the stories in the foreign press that say you were paralyzed.
غلط شدید و اینها شما که الان ماشاءالله خوب قدم میزنید راه میرید. خب راه میرم بله اشتباه بی خودی حرف بی خود ممکنه بزنن. It is possible that they said everything they want but
what is your condition? I mean
I am very good.
You look quite well.
Yes, I am good.
Dr. Simin Saleheh is another celebrated political prisoner apparently risen from the dead. According to all accounts, she and the baby she was carrying in her womb died under torture in Evin prison in 1974. She lost one eye, she told me, when a bomb that some of her friends were making in a house already under surveillance by SAVAK agents exploded prematurely.
What happened to Mrs. Saleheh when she was arrested by SAVAK and when she was interrogated? Was she ever tortured? Was she ever beaten up? Was she ever physically assaulted?
نحوه دستگیری من طوری بود که احتیاجی به طرح این مسائل نبود چون
The method of arrest was such that torture and beating were unnecessary.
تیمی ما رو ساواک میشناخت و بنابراین احتیاج نبود.
There was an explosion in the group's house. SAVAK knew where the house was. Then we come to the question of the information which I had. This presented no problem. I was pregnant at the time. No problem arose because our group's house was known to SAVAK. They didn't have to force me to tell them. Then we come to the question of the information which SAVAK had not got. This was obtained as a result of other arrests. I myself twice tried to commit suicide so as not to have to give away information, so that what I knew could not be got out of me. But luckily, or unluckily, I was saved. By that time, SAVAK knew everything. That is why there was no need for torture.
Mrs. Saleheh named her baby Sepida, Dawn. The child is growing up in the care of Mrs. Saleheh's parents, who are allowed to make visits to the prison. Though I sought from all the prisoners I talked with on and off camera an assurance that they were talking to me of their own free will, Mrs. Saleheh said afterwards she regretted talking to me because we filmed her child. The most interesting account of why torture for obtaining information is unnecessary was given to me by Kouroush Yakhtari. He was the leader of one of the biggest and most active terrorist groups in Iran. His charge sheet was long and included his involvement in a plot to kidnap the American ambassador. Yakhtari was sentenced to death but reprieved by the Shah. He also confirmed to me that the principal function of student organizations abroad is to promote opposition to the Shah.
Did he dispute any of the charges that were made against him by the security forces?
ما خودمون اقرار کردیم که این کارا رو کردیم. این کارا رو با
We admitted that we had done these things. We did them deliberately, on the basis of previous decisions and planning, because of the hatred we had for American imperialism.
تصمیم گرفته بودیم و بررسی کرده بودیم و به خاطر
Naturally, therefore, we admitted the charges in court and did so proudly.
ما در دادگاه هم گفتیم خیلی با افتخار گفتیم که بله ما این کارو کردیم.
During his imprisonment for investigation and interrogation, was he ever tortured? Was he ever beaten?
فقط بفرمایید موقع دستگیری چون عمل
At the time of arrest, the village was surrounded. Naturally, one's arms were held and twisted, and one was pushed into the car and handcuffed. That is not torture. It's quite natural. I'm sure that even in Britain, when they arrest Irish nationalists, they don't do so gently or with compliments, saying, please be seated in the car. That is natural. Because SAVAK makes use of advanced American imperialist techniques, please emphasize this, the procedure for arrest and investigation is made easier. Naturally, these methods are different from those of the past. As you know, prisoners were treated differently in earlier times. But nowadays, all the discussions we had in the mountains while we were giving military training to our young recruits were filmed and recorded by telecameras. They bugged our houses, they tapped our telephone conversations, and the recordings were available. Naturally, there was no scope for denying anything, so no pressure was needed to make us confess.
So in fact, is Mr. Yakhtari telling us that SAVAK's information about him was so good that they didn't need to torture him?
بله، تقریبا میشه گفت اطلاعاتشون اونقدر کافی بود و مدارک و شواهدی رو که تهیه.
Yes, this information and the evidence they had assembled was so complete that all I had to do was confirm that it was a picture of me and that I was present at the scene which was filmed. Naturally, I could not deny this evidence because all our friends, all that we had done, was nothing to be ashamed of. Indeed, we were proud of it. It was a path we had chosen with pride. Naturally, we confessed that we had done those things.
What was your cover name in the group?
I had several cover names, not just one.
What were they?
Puran, Manouche, Faran, Layla, Bowie.
Bowie. When you were arrested, what things did you have with you?
Various weapons, a grenade, a dagger.
These weapons here, are they the ones taken from you?
Yes.
And these items of equipment too?
Yes, the whole of this lot is mine.
All yours?
Yes.
Tell us, what were your operational activities in the group?
I took part in a reconnaissance operation in connection with blowing up the gendarmerie post at Suleymaniye. I planted the bomb myself.
You planted a bomb where?
In Suleymaniye, gendarmerie post.
Which post?
Suleymaniye.
Gendarmerie?
Yes.
I see. And what else?
In other reconnaissance operations in connection with the killing of Abbas Shariari.
After I had chosen the prisoners I wanted to talk with, I checked and double-checked, as far as I could, the allegations of torture. I also spent many hours questioning and re-questioning senior SAVAK officials up to the level of deputy commander. My impressions, for what they are worth, are these. I suspect that drugs are used on occasions to induce political prisoners to talk. But I am convinced, for reasons explained by Kouroush Yakhtari and supported by all other prisoners I talked to, that a great deal of nonsense is talked and written about the use of torture in Iran today. I am also convinced from the evidence given to me by political prisoners that all Iranian student organizations abroad have strong links with the forces of international terrorism, which are controlled indirectly and directly by Moscow.
Our intention was to mingle with the workers and farmers as Iranian Marxists and to make propaganda among them and encourage them to armed rebellion.
How much has he changed his views now? Does he still think that what Iran needs is good Marxist Leninism and an uprising to change the system?
من نمیتونم مسائل تاریخی رو پیشگویی کنم ولی میتونم
I can't predict historical events, but I can give my opinion based on the scientific criteria that we have learned. We believe that one day the whole world will be Marxist and socialist. That's what we always try to direct our efforts to.
مبنا قرار میدیم در نتیجه توی هر جامعه‌ای با ویژگی‌های خاص اون جامعه سعی می‌کنیم.
In every society with its special conditions, we try to implement this theory. Now in Iran, we've had to face some problems. And there have been some social changes which have been an obstacle to the growth of our strength and the setting up of a national workers' party. I attribute this to the special conditions prevailing in Iran rather than to the weakness of my ideology.
The number of political prisoners in Iran is also a subject which catches the imagination of the international press from time to time. The generally accepted and apparently agreed figure most often quoted is in the range of 40 to 60,000. Savak puts the number at 3,200, including 700 in prison under investigation. My impression, based on conversations with prisoners, is that Savak's figures are much closer to the truth.
While the liberty of the subject is a human right to be preserved under all possible conditions, it is not and cannot be an absolute right, because one man may use his liberty to take away the liberty of another and must be restrained from doing so. Where freedoms conflict, the state has a duty to protect those in need of protection.
Such sentiments have often been expressed by the Shah, but that quotation was from Britain's Lord Chief Justice, Lord Gardiner, in a recent report on the detention of political prisoners in Northern Ireland. The Shah believes he is putting into effect the necessary policies to protect the rule of law for the majority, policies which he thinks the liberal democracies will eventually be forced to adopt for themselves as the alternative to growing disorder and a slide towards anarchy. Iran covers an area almost as big as Western Europe and is potentially vulnerable on 6 borders, from the Persian Gulf, which makes her southern border, and from her land borders with Iraq, Turkey, Russia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. If, as some fear, the Indian subcontinent collapses into famine and anarchy in the years to come, Iran's position at the strategic crossroads of the planet could be of supreme importance to the non-communist world. If the Shah's reform program was designed to prevent the growth of homegrown communism, his huge expenditure on military hardware is intended in part to discourage the communists, but all others too, from crossing his borders. In 1976, the Shah was spending around 21% of his country's total budget on defense. Many Western newspapers described the massive arms buildup as another product of what's called the Shah's madness. But when the British withdrew from the Persian Gulf and the Americans were tiring of foreign adventures, they said in effect to the Shah, "You're on your own now." If the Shah was unwilling or unable to spend so much on defense, the West would be the loser. Only the history of the future will prove whether the Shah was wise or unwise to spend so much on defense. But if history condemns him for being unwise, it may also record that his feeling of insecurity was created less by his enemies and more by his allies, his friends, who twice this century have invaded his country.
We have got to remain independent. Just look at the fate of the countries who were not strong enough to defend themselves and who have lost their independence and where foreigners interfered. Just have a look at that.
What really is the central theme of your thinking on defense? Do you believe that Iran must have the strongest forces in the area merely as a deterrent so that other states dare not attack you? Or do you envisage circumstances in which Iran might have to go on to the offensive?
Offensive, no. But in the defense of the higher political goals of the region, yes, like we intervened in Oman at the request of the Sultan to save Oman from an eventual communist takeover.
So you could see yourself going beyond your own borders?
We have. We have gone in the case of Oman.
I think you once said to me that you weren't exactly going to sit on your backside and let your enemies come right up to your borders. Does that sum up your...
Yes, this is a very clear example of what you just mentioned.
I suppose it's one thing to talk about Iran's enemies and who they are, but I think I ought to ask you if you're not sometimes puzzled and confused about precisely who your friends are.
Well, sometimes yes, but you see, what is said or written in those Western countries of Europe, we cannot just say that this represents the real policy of that country. That's why, and anyway, we have no other choice. We have got to remain friends with the Western world, even if sometimes they abuse us. We have no other choice.
How do you evaluate Iran's strategic position, both in terms of your value as an anti-communist ally of the West, and in terms of Iran's strength as a factor in the overall balance of power between what we broadly call East and West?
Well, we have obviously 5-year plans. In 5 years' time, our forces will be quite respectable. Just imagine in 20 years' time, this country will be 65 million people. And our strength, if the world had not changed in the meantime and decided for disarmament and those things that we pray for, hope for, but I don't know if it's going to happen that soon. It will be one of the most solid stability foundations that you could see anywhere. At least I believe that we shall continue the present policies for the unforeseeable future, and the result will be to contribute to a very great extent to the stability of this region.
One thing that would worry me, if I may put it this way, if I were you, is that at the moment Iran can afford to go on spending a lot of money on defense. But there may come a time, particularly when oil revenues decline, when you can't go on updating your great arsenal. What then?
Well, we shall then readapt ourselves to the conditions. Now that we can, we have that duty towards ourselves and the rest. If it's absolutely impossible, then we will just resign ourselves to our stature.
But there could come a time in the future when you might need the West to save you if you were under really serious attack.
if our oil is finished, if the oil of this part of the world is finished, I don't think that the West is going to lift their fingers in our defense.
The Shah of Iran has never before given such a frank, public indication of his secret fear, abandonment by the West when oil is finished. If that is the fear that haunts him, and I suspect it is, then everything about what he's doing for and to his country is explained. Explained too is the speed at which he's driving his country on to become developed, industrialized and modern before the money to pay for progress runs short. Ironically, it's the progress Iran has made which poses the biggest potential threat to the future, a counter-revolution of rising but unfulfilled expectations. The chances of that happening could be increased if Western industrialized nations refuse to pay more for oil. If a counter-revolution was to materialize, it would have its inspiration in the frustrations of the middle class which the Shah's revolution has so successfully created. Like most human beings in developed and advanced societies, those in Iran who've benefited most from the Shah's revolution want what it's no longer possible to have in the conditions of today's changing world. More and more of everything. Where Iran is different and perhaps much more fortunate than the established democracies is that it enjoys the kind of leadership which, because of the traditional need for it, has the possibility to persuade the people to adjust their expectations. If the Shah has the courage to say stop, there are limits to what we can possess, there's a good chance that his people would obey. If there is ambiguity in the Shah's desire for democracy, this is the cause of it. For if the decision-making process becomes fully democratized along Western lines, the mechanism for decision-making could be seriously damaged.
Why do you think the people of Iran may succeed where we appear to be faltering and perhaps failing?
Because I give the leadership. I'm a little uneasy to speak about myself and that I'm giving the leadership. But this is the truth, because they trust me and I give the leadership and they accept it.
I have the impression that as far as the business of running the country is concerned, you are a very lonely man. And I imagine that there might well be times when you throw up your hands in exasperation, because some of those around you are not always as efficient or as honest as you want.
Well, that is possible, but that is why with this national party, with the participation of all of our people, really. I think we have more than 7 million members of the party now. Very soon, most of the decisions will be made by the people themselves, and I will be kept to take the ultimate, very important decisions, which will represent the real highest interests of the country. So I have hope that this loneliness will gradually become less and less.
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, has been at the controls for 35 years. In the process of changing his country, he has helped to change the world too. But even for the man with such power at his command, the ultimate test of leadership is still in the future. In the years that remain to him, can he create the institutions of democratic government which will give his country its best chance for stability when he is gone? The facts about his country surely prove that he's on a good course for democracy. What has to be emphasized is that the style of democracy for which the Shah is searching is one that will be relevant to Iran's own real needs. What might be good for Britain or America is not necessarily good for Iran. To deny the Shah his achievements, you've got to be very prejudiced against him or amongst those who want democracy to fail. I think, Your Majesty, you worry a great deal about the future.
Well, yes, of course, everybody does. I think not only for the future of our country, but for the future of the whole world. Because I wonder where we are going. We have such a growth in every field, industrial, technological, and where will that lead us if the aim is not the happiness of a human being, is the real aim is not the human being?
What do you think are the fundamental questions that Iranians must ask and then find the answers to if the future is to be guaranteed in the way you want in terms of happiness and contentment for the people?
You know, it's very difficult to say because there are many questions asked at the international level about all we have called progress till now. Because progress, of course, was useful. It helps to make disappear disease and poverty and hunger and all that. But at the same time, brings so many other negative things, which is at the disadvantage of a human being. It brings pollution, it brings corruption, it brings the tearing up of families, it makes disappear all sorts of human contact. People do not have time to talk to each other. They don't care about each other. They are just working too hard for gaining more money and sometimes buying things which are not useful.
More materialistic.
More materialistic. And if we do not find solution for our own country, which is a little bit attached to our own traditions, to our own way of living. I don't say whatever came from the West or modern is unuseful. It has the good side and the negative side. And in our tradition also we have some good parts and the negative part of it. But to find the right balance, the good balance, and to educate, in my point of view, to real human beings with all the moral and human values which do not disappear. I think even if we are in the 21st century, it is the same that what was in 2,000 years ago, honesty, righteousness, or humanity, or hospitality, or all those sort of things. I don't think it has changed with modern life. It should be there.
I wonder if, in a sense, you're too much of an idealist. I wonder if human nature is actually as good as you think it is.
If any of us give up, then there is no hope. And the moment I feel other people feeling the same way, they encourage me. If I can encourage them, and if I can continue in a way, I'm idealistic, maybe it's true, but in my position I'm also realistic. I'm not outside of the fighting ground. I am also in it. So I'm not just talking philosophy. But I think there are ways to educate our children for a better future, because otherwise what is the progress for? And you know, sometimes when you say you're depressed, I get depressed because I wonder whether I'm right or wrong, whether I'm too naive or too idealistic.
In Iran, the quality of human values is still much determined by religious laws handed down centuries before the age of materialism dawned. To set his people on the path to freedom from ignorance and poverty, the Shah had in effect to declare war on the negative aspects of Islam or the way it was interpreted. That the risks the Shah took were high is evidenced by the fact that those who plotted most frequently to assassinate him were, and still are, the product of fanatical religious hatred and fear of change. To save the fruits of his revolution from being sacrificed to the new religion, materialism, and its god, progress, the Shah now has a different fight on his hands. He must find ways to promote the positive aspects of the old faith, and he must summon back the spirits of ancient values which so influenced Iran before Islam was imposed on the country by Arab invaders in the 7th century. As Queen Farah said, the challenge is to find the right balance between the old values and the new. In the holy city of Mashhad and throughout Iran, the call to prayer still evokes a response. The spirits of ancient values are being summoned.